For several seconds after Daniel said those words, nobody moved. The city lights outside the apartment windows reflected against the dining table like cold silver knives. Vanessa crossed her arms and looked away as if the conversation had already ended. Ethan stared at me with wide, frightened eyes, waiting for an adult to fix what had just happened. But no one did. I slowly placed my napkin beside my plate and looked directly at my son. A burden, I repeated quietly. Daniel sighed heavily, like I was the difficult one for making him uncomfortable. Dad, don't make this dramatic. Dramatic. Funny how quickly children forget the size of the shoulders they once stood on. I nodded once and leaned back in my chair. You know, I said calmly, when you were 11 years old, you got pneumonia during winter. Do you remember that? Daniel frowned slightly. What does that have to do with anything? The roads were closed from snow. The ambulance couldn't reach our village. So I carried you myself. Vanessa looked irritated already. Harold, I ignored her completely. 3 miles through freezing snow. You were burning with fever, shaking in my arms. I slipped twice crossing the creek bridge. Thought I might die before reaching town. Daniel looked down at the table. Dad, stop. No, I said firmly for the first time since moving into that apartment. You call me a burden. So tonight you'll listen. Ethan stared at me silently, his small hands gripping the edge of the chair. I sold half my farmland so you could study in Chicago, I continued. I wore boots with holes in them for 2 winters because tuition came first. I skipped insulin medication for months because I couldn't afford both your housing and my prescriptions. Vanessa suddenly scoffed. Parents sacrifice for their children all the time. That doesn't mean children owe them forever. I turned toward her slowly. No, but decent children remember. The room became dangerously quiet after that. Daniel stood up abruptly from the table. This is exactly what I mean, he snapped. Every conversation becomes guilt and sacrifice with you. I'm tired of feeling responsible for your happiness. That sentence hit harder than the first one somehow, because now I understood the truth clearly. My son no longer saw me as family. He saw me as emotional debt, an obligation, a reminder of where he came from. I looked at him carefully and realized something else too. Daniel wasn't the same boy I raised anymore. Somewhere between expensive suits, corporate promotions, and luxury apartments, he had become ashamed of the man who built his life. I stood slowly from the table. My knees hurt more than usual that night, but I refused to show weakness in front of them. You won't have to feel responsible anymore, I said quietly. Ethan immediately looked panicked. Grandpa, I placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. It's all right, buddy. Vanessa didn't even try to hide her relief. That hurt more than her insults ever could. I walked toward the guest room and closed the door softly behind me. Then I sat on the edge of the bed for nearly an hour, staring at my old suitcase. I kept replaying Daniel's voice in my head. You're a burden on this family. Funny thing about betrayal. It doesn't arrive all at once. It builds slowly over years through smaller disappointments until one sentence finally breaks the entire structure. Around midnight, there was a soft knock on my door. Ethan stepped inside, quietly holding something behind his back. Mom and Dad are fighting, he whispered nervously. I forced a small smile. Families argue sometimes. He walked closer and handed me a folded drawing. It showed a little farm beneath a bright yellow sun. Stick figures stood beside a barn. One was labeled Grandpa. The other was labeled me. I made it at school, he said softly. My throat tightened instantly. It's beautiful. Ethan sat beside me carefully. Are you really leaving? Children ask questions adults avoid because they still believe honesty matters. I looked at the drawing for a long moment before answering. Probably, because Dad was mean. I didn't want to poison the boy against his father. No matter what Daniel became, he was still Ethan's dad. Your father's stressed, I said carefully. City life changes people sometimes. Ethan lowered his head. Mom says the village is dirty. I smiled faintly. The village has dirt, yes. That's where food grows. For the first time that night, Ethan laughed a little. Then his expression became serious again. I don't think you're a burden. Those 6 words nearly broke me, because they came from the only honest person left in that apartment. I placed a hand gently on his hair. Thank you. A few minutes later, Daniel appeared at the doorway. He looked exhausted and irritated at the same time. Ethan, bedtime. The boy hesitated before hugging me tightly. After he left, Daniel remained standing there awkwardly. Neither of us spoke immediately. Finally, he sighed. Dad, tonight got out of control. No. Ian suarat calmly. Tonight revealed the truth. He rubbed his forehead again, a habit he developed whenever uncomfortable emotions appeared. You know, Vanessa didn't mean everything she said. But you did. That shut him up instantly. I continued quietly. The worst part isn't that you called me a burden. The worst part is you believed it before saying it. Daniel looked away toward the hallway. You don't understand the pressure I'm under. Then explain it. He stayed silent for several seconds. My career depends on perception, he finally admitted. Networking, reputation, image. People notice things. I almost laughed at how pathetic it sounded. So your old farmer father damages your image? That's not what I said. It's exactly what you said, just with nicer words. Daniel's jaw tightened. You judge my life without understanding it. No, son, I replied softly. I understand it perfectly now. For the first time all evening, guilt flickered across his face. But it disappeared quickly. Maybe returning to the village would be better for everyone, he muttered. Better for everyone. Strange phrase. Usually spoken by people making selfish decisions while pretending they're practical. I nodded slowly. You're probably right. Daniel looked relieved hearing that. Relieved. Imagine that. A son relieved to send his aging father away. He mumbled something about discussing arrangements tomorrow and left the room. After the door closed, I sat there in silence for a long time. Then something unexpected happened. Instead of sadness, I felt clarity. Painful clarity, but clarity nonetheless. For months, I had blamed myself for not fitting into their world. I tried changing how I dressed, how I spoke, even what I cooked. I thought if I became less inconvenient, maybe my son would love me the same way again. But the truth was simpler and uglier. Daniel didn't want a father. He wanted distance from his origins. And I represented everything he spent years trying to escape. Around 2 in the morning, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Martha back in the village. How's city life treating you, Harold? I stared at the message for several seconds before replying. Cold. A minute later, she answered. Home's still here. Those 3 words settled something deep inside my chest. Home's still here. I looked around the expensive guest room with its spotless furniture and silent air conditioning. Not once since arriving had this place felt like home. It felt like temporary storage for an unwanted old man. I stood slowly, opened my suitcase, and began packing quietly. Shirt by shirt, pair of boots, old photographs, medicine bottles. By dawn, everything was ready. I didn't plan dramatic speeches or emotional goodbyes. Some relationships die quietly. Around 6 in the morning, I walked into the kitchen and found Vanessa drinking coffee in her silk robe. She looked genuinely surprised seeing the suitcase. You're leaving already? Yes. She took a slow sip from her cup. Honestly, I think this is for the best. I studied her face carefully. She wasn't evil exactly, just shallow. The kind of person who measures human value through status and convenience. One day, I told her calmly, you'll grow old too. Her expression hardened immediately. Excuse me? And when that day comes, I hope nobody treats you like excess baggage. She didn't answer. A few minutes later, Daniel walked into the kitchen looking half awake. When he saw the suitcase, his face tightened awkwardly. You didn't have to rush out like this. I'm not rushing. I picked up my coat. I'm leaving with dignity before there's none left. Daniel looked uncomfortable hearing that. Good. Some discomfort was long overdue. I'll send money every month, he said quickly, like financial support could replace respect. Keep it, I answered. I survived before your salary existed. That wounded his pride instantly. He hated being reminded that his success came from sacrifices he now considered embarrassing. Ethan suddenly ran into the kitchen, still wearing pajamas. Grandpa, he looked between us desperately. You can't leave yet. I knelt carefully despite the pain in my knees. I have to, buddy. Can I visit the farm? Before I could answer, Vanessa interrupted sharply. Ethan, enough. But I looked directly at my grandson and smiled softly. Anytime you want. Then I stood, grabbed my suitcase, and walked toward the apartment door. Daniel followed behind me. Dad. I paused without turning around. What? For a moment, I thought maybe he would apologize.